Blinded by Wealth, Part 6.
Village. Abena stepped into what seems like paradise. A towering mansion with white marble floors and glittering chandeliers. The vast hallways were lined with expensive paintings, and each room was adorned with velvet curtains and golden furniture. But despite its beauty, the house felt strangely empty. There were no maids bustling about, no laughter or warmth, only an eerie silence that seemed to stretch through every corner. When she asked Mr. Aqua why the house was so quiet, he merely smiled and said, "This is a home for peace, not chaos." His words did nothing to comfort her, neither did his next revelation. "You must never leave this house, Abena. The city is dangerous. There are people who would wish you harm." She wanted to argue, but the way he said it, the way his dark eyes seemed to see straight through her, made her swallow her words. At first, she tried to ignore her growing discomfort. The food was luxurious, the clothes he provided were beautiful, and she wanted to believe she could be happy. But days passed, then weeks, and Mr. Aqua barely spoke to her. He would leave in the morning and return late at night, going straight to his study room, locking the door behind him. When she knocked, there was no answer. When she called for him, he acted as if he didn't hear. And though she had been prepared for her duties as his wife, Mr. Aqua never touched her, not once. At first, she was relieved, but soon, the absence of his presence became more terrifying than the alternative. If he didn't want her as his wife, then why had he married her? She thought. It was the little things that unsettled her the most. The fact that there were no mirrors in the house, as if her own reflection was forbidden. The way the windows, though large and magnificent, never seemed to let in any fresh air. And then there was the door at the end of the hall, always locked, no matter the time of the day. She tried to push the unease away, telling herself she was imagining things, but the nights were the worst. Sometimes she heard a low humming, like a chant echoing through the halls. Other times, it was the scent of a thick, cloying incense that left her dizzy and lightheaded, as if the air itself was drugging her. She thought of her parents, of Kofi, of the life she had left behind. Was this really the fate she had chosen? One night, as she lay in bed, the whisper was broken by a voice. "Abena." It was soft but faint, cutting through the air like a whisper against her ear. She turned, her heart pounding, as she saw Mr. Aqua standing in the doorway. His expression was unreadable, his silhouette dark against the candlelight. "Come," he said, "I have something to show you." She hesitated, but something in his voice, something almost hypnotic, made her rise. She followed him down the long hallway, past the cold painting and the flickering candles, until they reached the door that had always been locked. Tonight it was open. The moment she stepped inside, the scent hit her first. Thick, metallic, and unmistakably blood. Her stomach twisted as she took in the room before her. Strange symbols, drilled in blood, covered the walls. Dark candles flickered at the edges of the room, casting monstrous shadows that danced like living creatures. In the center, a large circle was carved into the marble floors, the pattern twisting in an unnatural shapes. The air felt wrong, as if the walls themselves were breathing. She took a step back, but before she could turn, Something heavy crashed against the back of her skull. Pain exploded through her head, and the world went black. When she woke up, she was lying in the center of the cycle. Her hands and feet were bound with thick ropes, and her body was wrapped in a red wrapper, the fabric cold against her skin. Her heart pounded wildly as she struggles, but the binds only tightened. The room was no longer empty. Hooded figures stood around her, their faces hidden beneath dark robes. They whispered in a language she didn't understand, their voices merging into a sinister chant. The world seemed to shift, pausing with every beat of her heart. She turned her head, and there he was, Mr. Aqua, standing at the head of the cycle, his eyes cold and void of anything human. His lips moved in a slow, deliberate murmur, as if calling something, summoning something. A deep, guttural voice filled the room, but it did not come from any of the figure. It came from nowhere. It came from everywhere. The sacrifice is ready. The words were like a growl, vibrating through the air and into her very bone. A gust of wind rushed through the room, though there were no windows. The candles flickered violently, the shadows stretching unnaturally. Abena screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the chanting. Mr. Aqua stepped forward, a gleaming blade in his hand. It was curved, sharp, its edges reflecting the dim light. He raised it high above his head, his expression eerily calm, almost reverent. "Do not be afraid," he murmured. "Your sacrifice will not be in vain." Abena thrashed, her breath coming in ragged sobs. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. This was it. This was why he had married her. Abena's body trembled, the ropes biting into her skin as she struggled in vain against her restraints. Her cries filled the dark chamber, desperate and pleading. "Please leave me alone. I don't want to do this," she begged, her voice ragged. Her eyes were wide with terror as she stared at Mr. Aqua, standing over her, his twisted grin stretching unnaturally across his face. "Please don't do this to me. I beg you. I don't want your money. Just send me back to my family." But his cold laugh echoed through the room, chilling her to the bone. "You think you have a choice?" he sneered, the malice in his voice unmistakable. "You and your family took my money. Now you will pay the price." The words hung in the air, heavy with the finality of her fate. Mr. Aqua's hand rose slowly, and in it he held the gleaming blade. The metal caught the flickering candlelight, making it seem alive and hungry. With a deliberate motion, he dragged the sharp edges across Abena's skin, the deep cuts burning as it tore through her flesh. Her scream filled the air, raw and filled with agony. Warm blood spilled from the wound, pulling onto the cold floor, soaking into the ritual circle. The air around her grew thick, heavy with a seeking energy. Each drop of blood that touched the ground seemed to feed the dark power that surrounded them. Mr. Aqua's voice began to rise in incantations, low and unnatural, echoing off the walls. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist in response, like living creatures watching her every move. Abena gasped for air, the pain overwhelming her senses. "Why are you doing this to me?" she choked out, the tears streaming down her face. She could barely speak, the world blurring around her, but still she had to know. Her body trembled uncontrollably as Mr. Aqua leaned in closer, his cold breath brushing against her ear. "Do you think I married you because you are beautiful?" he whispered, his voice filled with cruel amusement. "Do you think I married you